right, welcome to podcast Moves That Matter with me, Mike Berry, and my co-host here, Mr. Michael Looney.
Good to be here, Mike.
Yeah, he was out last week, so we're happy to have him back. He was actually down for the count, had caught a bug, but I think he said he ate an apple and did some push-ups, so now he's ready to rock.
Ready to go. We're ready to go.
Okay, so last week what you missed, Mike, was we actually had Mike Pratt from Community Development Strategies in here to talk about the housing study he just completed, actually the second housing study he just completed for San Angelo. So we dug into that a little bit and talked about some overarching concepts about why those studies are important. And so we're going to use that as a jumping off point today, where we're going to talk about what is that, what are those types of studies, that information, how we use that to plan, how does that look like in the eyes of site selectors?
And that's a good podcast because, as you and I know, we've worked with Mike for a long time, based out of Houston, CDS company. What a passionate preacher for all things housing in any community in this country. And if anyone hasn't seen it, that is a podcast definitely worth looking at, even twice.
For sure, definitely. So let me bridge the gap here with housing and site selection before we get into the details of site selection. And to kind of spin off of what Mike kind of presented and where our gaps were and what our plan ahead is I think it's important to say that when it comes to selecting a place to do business, right? Available housing has really shifted from what you would call a secondary quality of life factor for site selectors to more of a primary quantifiable constraint in the decision-making process for those site selectors, right? Housing scarcity and cost are what I would call major risk factors that can eliminate a community off that short list because that's how the site selectors view it. They view it through a lens of risk, talent acquisition, and overall, really not short-term benefit, but long-term viability. And not to take away from housing, and we'll get into this more later, but I think the single biggest factor in site selection, you tell me if you agree, is the labor pool. And available housing directly impacts your labor pool.
There's a lot of talk we hear in the press the past couple of years about AI. And we hear this mantra is repeated over and over. AI is going to be eliminating career tracks and jobs, and I think there are some factors that are truthful in that. But really, when it comes down to, like you just said, the labor pool, ultimately it all depends on the human factor. And corporations, manufacturers, energy companies, service companies, they all understand the one thing, and the good ones understand that if you take care of your people, the people will take care of the customers, and that will take care of the company's viability and health. So labor pool, you and I have found, is probably the most critical component of any recruitment or expansions that we've done with corporations here in San Angelo.
It's a non-starter. I mean,
if you
really
don't have it, it's a non-starter,
Yeah.
and even in the manufacturing sector. So let's put aside the whole AI mystique, robotics in manufacturing. Robotics really, in my experience, isn't replacing people. It's filling gaps that people aren't already filling. That they can't find people who will do certain functions.
But then
it's so repetitive.
And in turn, what it's doing is you're actually requiring a higher level skilled employee to keep those robots running,
Totally.
to keep them functioning, to manage the PLCs.
It's high level technician type stuff.
Yeah.
So then you get commensurate higher pay. So and that leads to healthier families and healthier communities. So it all really that's one thing I find is that there's always kind of this overarching belief that there's some power that controls a marketplace. Really, it's the corporations and the people that control the marketplace, and the marketplace adapts to that.
Yeah.
And so circling back to labor force, that's absolutely the most critical thing that we get asked by site selectors and CEOs and CFOs with corporations that we work with is tell us about the labor pool first. And San Angelo's got a lot of strengths with our labor pool. It's smaller, it's more compressed, but we've also found it's more accessible and it's more loyal. And
Yeah.
I think we want to get into that too.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in a massive market, let's pick on Houston for a second. Love Houston. You have such a massive labor pool, and you have so much turnover because there are so many options. Whereas what we found at San Angelo is that people tend to just weigh anchor when it comes to working for a company, and they become very, very loyal to that company. And that company benefits from that. So we'll talk more about that. And I know you have an experience with that too.
Yeah, but weighing anchor, I think, to your point, right? If a community is not going to be able to offer housing options that align with somebody's lifestyle or their income, they're not going to weigh anchor, or they're not even going to come here.
They're not. And we've seen that with the hospital system. We've seen that with several manufacturers that are trying to recruit high-level, leadership-level talent, and they just can't get them to stick because they just say, we just can't find a house.
Yeah. And then if, let's say they do find a house, but if costs are high due to low inventory, well, now the effective salary required to attract those workers starts increasing dramatically.
Right.
You start pricing people out of the market. And then bigger picture-wise, lack of inventory, unfortunately, what that signals is a scalability problem for a business.
It does.
And more importantly, I think if there's a housing shortage in a community, what that then communicates about the overall community is that it indicates some underlying issues with the community's ability to handle growth, which can then extend to school capacity, traffic, utility services, all of which are looked at by site selectors.
Of course. And they see, some smaller tertiary markets and even secondary markets, they see it as a boutique market. And that doesn't necessarily bode well for the expansion or the scalability of a company. So if you get a company that comes in and say, this is phase one's going well, but phase two's coming right behind it, where's the commensurate housing? That's where the challenges start.
Yep. So I think we as economic developers have to treat housing as a product. So we talk about having product on the ground, like your industrial spec buildings, spaces for businesses to move into, not having to wait to get something built or the infrastructure there. But I think we got to look at housing as a product that needs developing as well, right? It's got to be a data point in all the data sets. Housing has to be. There's got to be a housing development plan. And that's kind of what this housing study has done, is it's our first initial step in getting us to a point where we have a development plan that when we're asked, we can present that and say, here's the plan, here's our target, here's how we're making progress along that plan. Because the availability of diverse, attractive neighborhoods is what's going to complete our community's overall value proposition to either a business or a business's site selectors, that in turn is what's going to attract and retain that high-quality talent.
Well, you said it perfectly. I think also when we look at some of our other markets in Texas, where you'll have perhaps a neutral or a flat level of your labor shed compared to the need that regional companies, local companies might have. When you see new communities come into markets, it brings in people who may not necessarily be looking for a home so that they can serve a certain corporation that's in town. They just move there because it's a nice place to live. Then that corpus starts demanding more opportunities, which really opens up a clear runway for more corporations, more companies, more enterprises to come into the market, because you've already got that labor shed. We've seen that in Northwest Houston. That's a good example.
Yeah.
Where you have these just magnificent, very beautiful, nice, very well put together neighborhoods that weren't built in response to the presence of a corporation. They're just a nice place to live. And then the corporations start to notice that we've got this labor pool that's just sitting here untapped. We want to be in that area and start offering those opportunities. And a lot of them take them too.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to ask a question, though, and I want your opinion on this. And I think I know the answer, but I want to bring this up for our viewers. The housing study was done to just get a good understanding of where San Angelo is with its housing situation. Do you have any thoughts on a deeper reason why that study might be most important?
Well,
I'll boomerang it back to me because I've already got a thought on that.
tell me yours and I'll add to it.
San Angelo is not a tertiary isolated market like I think it's been for a long time, which was dependent heavily on energy and agriculture. San Angelo has been discovered, and we're starting to see high-level equity investment companies making moves in San Angelo quietly. And we're not going to name names because they wouldn't want us to do that, and it'd be obviously very premature to do that. But a lot of national money is starting to flow in and research the market and purchase within the market. So the housing study is an important component into the community and the home developers and the Home Builders Association and the Economic Development Mission to understand what it is that we need, because that's a kind of establishing a beachhead for what's coming.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. And we've seen that in other communities. You know, let's look at Tyler, Texas. Let's look at Taylor, Texas. Let's look at Gerald, Texas. 25 years ago, Waco was a very different city than it is now. And if we don't get ahead of it with data-driven analytics and third-party studies, the same thing will happen that happened 30 years ago in Round Rock, Texas. The developers and the equity investors, they're coming anyway. Mm-hmm. And once they discover a market, they will begin developing the market for the city,
right,
which is not necessarily smart growth. So they're just going to come infill the city and just kind of do what they want on a private sector side. And they can actually leapfrog a lot of the infrastructure and just even the psychological preparation that a city and a community leadership team needs to be prepared for. And that's one of the things that I think is very exciting about what you and I get to do, is see this influx. And so when people ask us, you know, hey, Mike, what's going on? We're very limited as to what we can share, but it's almost overwhelming.
It is, but to your point, I mean, that's the important part that I think I've seen us play, is that us knowing what's on the horizon. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of our projects are 3 to 5 years before they actually come to fruition. So
right, before they announce and anybody even knows about them.
We're having conversations. We're entertaining, you know, site visits, and for years before these things actually pop up. But knowing what's coming, we've spurred a lot of discussion that otherwise wouldn't happen at the municipality level, mm-hmm, to start planning for infrastructure upgrades, to get some engineering studies done, comprehensive plans in the queue, housing studies done, so that we're making decisions and making moves going forward based off what the data says, not just, oops, we didn't know that was going to be here 2 years ago, let's see what we can do to try to shore up the gaps, right? So let's move into a little more detailed discussion about site selectors for the audience that doesn't necessarily understand what that term really means. And I want to talk about what site selectors do, and then we'll kind of get into more or less what they want to see from our perspective. Yeah. And I'll start off by saying this. Generally speaking, I think site selectors they're risk managers, mm-hmm, and they're objective analysts for a corporation, a business, what have you.
Right. Usually third party.
Yep.
Hired gun, sometime term we use. They work for the company as a service provider, but they're not with the company. So they have a more neutral view. They can ask questions that perhaps leadership of a corporate, let's call it a manufacturer. Manufacturers are very good at manufacturing. We saw this with Rosenberger, which is one of our smaller transactions, but with a massive company, a huge 16,000 person company based out of Germany. And we were working with one of their actual members of leadership, and it was a great relationship, and it worked out very well. But they went it without a hired third party site selector, so we had to really coach them through a lot of the questions that they should be asking, and it worked out great. Most companies, though, enterprises are going to work with a third party, and that third party is going to ask the important questions. I mean, not necessarily hard questions, but just the important questions. You know, what's the labor shed like? What's the power availability like? What's the community's appetite for this kind of a development in our community? You know, do they like us?
Yeah.
Do they think
they hate us?
Do they dislike us?
Yeah.
Do they find us to be a potential threat? And what I've found, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is I've found a lot of site selectors are very conscientious. They're not just get the deal done and move on to the next one. I think maybe they'd kind of like to do that, but they're very conscientious in that. We've had a lot of conversations with companies that'll say or site selectors will say we like San Angelo. It's one of 5 cities we're looking at. We like what we see so far. Help us understand how we're not going to cannibalize any other companies that maybe are somewhat similar with a similar labor shed need. We don't want to do that. We don't want to come into a community and raid other companies. And I think that's important for the public to know that almost all these site selectors we talk to, that's something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to invite a company into a community, have a big grand opening, top of fold newspaper article, here they come, and then they start raiding other companies. Nobody wants to do that, and no company wants to be known for doing that. They're not that bloodthirsty.
Yeah, and I think a better term for site selector probably to describe exactly what it is they're doing on a day-to-day basis is really we ought to call them site eliminators, right?
Yeah.
They spend most of their time not finding the perfect site,
Right.
but sifting through and efficiently eliminating those unsuitable sites for all those reasons you just said.
Great way to put it.
Right?
Yep.
And so aside, they're getting their list down to 3 to 5 key places where they think the business needs to be, but then they're doing that quantitative analysis where they're looking at what would be the total cost of an operation in a particular location. They're going to compare the locations based off of operating costs, utility rates, taxes, maybe incentives at some point, depending upon what that how that conversation
Any
goes.
assistance that's constructive, sure.
But then
we can talk more about that in a minute.
Yeah.
I think people need to understand what, quote, incentives are.
Right.
And why we don't call them incentives. We call them assistance.
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
And I think there's a difference.
There is, but then we can't neglect, and you touched on this a little bit, is after that quantitative analysis, where they're looking at those key hard numbers and do the numbers work, they're doing a qualitative analysis where they're actually looking for fit or feeling for the community overall, right?
I'm glad you touched on
They're
that.
going to gauge cultural fit.
You bet. And I
They're going
think
to look at the
that's
political climate. They're going to look at educational partnerships, the overall receptiveness of the community to them coming in here and doing business and potentially growing and what have you.
I would call that the non-data driven component of the decision. And we saw that with the company I just mentioned a minute ago, Rosenberger, when they made the announcement to us privately, and they said, okay, we're moving this factory from Pennsylvania to San Angelo, which was very exciting. We're very proud of that achievement, very glad for that. But I remember us asking the gentleman that we were working with, what was the final, what really tipped the scale? And he said, leadership just really liked San Angelo. I'm like, well, how do you quantify that? I mean, how do we take that and apply that to our recruitment effort and our expansion effort, business retention expansion? And that was I don't know that we ever can do that. They said, it just had a good feel. And I said, well, explain that to us. The guy's name was Kyle we're dealing with. I said, explain what a good feel is. I don't know what that is. Now, these are German engineers. And you remember working with them.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is black and white.
Yep.
And it made it easy to work with them because their yes was yes, their no was no, and they knew exactly what they wanted. But then towards the end of the negotiations, it was, well, it's got a good feel to it. And I said, that doesn't sound very German engineering-ish to us. Can you explain that? He said, well, they had that kind of gut feel that establishing the operation here, the cable connector manufacturing facility here, they felt strongly that the community would adopt them, would like them, and then groom the field of opportunities for them to expand that operation.
Yeah, I think a big factor in that really now has been the site manager that they brought in from elsewhere.
Yep.
One, he felt like he was a part of the community.
That's right.
And
which was a tough one because he was from Europe, or is from Europe.
Yeah.
And
but that's been a
you
big
take a guy
factor.
who a very sophisticated engineer from Europe, and you would think that they would want to be in a Dallas or an Atlanta or Houston or somewhere like that. He said, "Nah, this is a good feel to it," which was interesting because not to just stay on that topic of that one company because we've done a lot more than with a lot of other companies, but we found that company strategically tends to lean towards smaller tertiary communities, even in Europe, for the reason that you and I just touched on a minute ago. They find that if you're a bigger player in a smaller community, you get a lot more buy-in. the employee pool tends to have a sense of duty and leadership, ownership of that smaller company. Whereas if they're just in a massive market, they're just another company on Interstate 10.
Yeah.
And if you don't like them, you can move to the one next door, and maybe they'll pay $1 more an hour, and maybe you like them better, and you go to the next one. Whereas here, that's important. That's an important point. You just brought up a second ago was retention.
Yeah.
Hiring people's easy. It's
Keeping
retaining them. Because if and you've seen this even in Ethicon. You find somebody who's just a superstar, and then 18 months later they find something different. Well, all that institutional knowledge has just left the door.
Not to mention the cost of turnover.
That's right.
It's a waste. So I think from an economic development standpoint, I think kind of what we're getting at is that it's really no longer about just offering the largest incentive package. That may be part of the conversation later in the process, but really it's about overall product readiness, risk mitigation, and ultimately the community's value proposition.
Sure.
That's really what it's coming down to.
So it's a whole package.
You're right.
It's not just one thing or the other. And we find this a lot. We talk to, in fact, there's an organization that puts out a report every year on recruitment and expansion of enterprises in all kinds of different markets throughout the United States, and what their partner component of incentives were. And you find these huge transactions, and you have these massive incentives packages, and it almost becomes an obvious. It's like, well, obviously this company would have expanded in such and such a community with that kind of an incentives package. And I think that's important for us to talk about, and we can talk about it a little bit later on this podcast. There are kind of two faces of incentives, and you and I like to use the term, and we use it a lot, is assistance. If you're helping a company that's going to be constructing a factory, and they need a little bit of help on the front end, because that factory is not going to make any money for the first 3 to 5 years of its existence. It's a loss leader, but they have to build it. Sometimes a constructive tax break on the front end can help bridge that gap and make those construction costs a little bit more manageable, maybe sometimes a lot more manageable. But it's not throwing municipal dollars at corporations to get them to not move somewhere else. And we see both of that, and that can become a very dangerous game. And there are some communities that use incentives to basically convince companies, don't move 20 miles away. We'll help make your numbers for you. And that's different. And we don't do that. I can't think of an example where we even have done that.
Not in my time here, no.
Yeah,
definitely
we haven't
not.
either.
So I think the community itself has to be viewed as a product.
Exactly.
Right? It's the whole package in and of itself as a product. I think the other key to working with site selectors and just economic development practice in general is that collaboration is mandatory across all interested parties, whether that's the county, the city, the various departments within the city, your educational partners, all that. Collaboration is mandatory, and if they don't see that, they're walking the other way. And then finally, economic development is really half execution, half narrative. They go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other.
That's right.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to kind of take this topic and kind of drill down from kind of a national, state, down to local level perspective, and talk a little bit about some of the trends that are affecting site selection. And I think one of the biggest ones on a national level right now is what you hear is reshoring or nearshoring. And basically what that is that means producing in the U.S. what was previously produced offshore. So it could be synonymous with reindustrialization of the U.S., right? And that means securing the U.S. manufacturing supply chain, reinvigorating innovation, and bringing more jobs back to the U.S.
Right.
And to do that, though, is requiring massive increases in investment in automation, but more importantly, the training and education of the workforce that we haven't had to have in the last 30, 40 years. And that need it's really less of a, right now, of a labor shortage, I think, that we're seeing, and it's more of a skill shortage. So that component for reshoring or nearshoring to be successful, aside from the investment dollars, there's got to be investment in the upskilling of the existing workforce to handle the jobs that are needed because of the automation like we talked about earlier. And I think a key theme with regards to that today is that companies, manufacturers, have moved beyond looking at low-cost sources and are rather planning for supply chain risks that are bigger than what they experienced during the 2020 COVID-19 kind of scenario. Those things that could cause massive disruptions. And they're focusing more on that, getting away from one concept is the just-in-time inventory model to a just-in-case inventory model as an example of that. And then the focus really has been they're ensuring that their manufacturing is co-located with engineering, and they're putting a much more high value on that quick delivery capability, which is forcing them to be closer to their local sources. And just to encapsulate what that really means is it's really all about regionalizing the local supply chain, right?
Right.
Getting it closer,
Going back to the way
reducing the risk.
it used to be.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's funny how we've oscillated as a global community and as a global economy to where we're oscillating back to more regional sourcing of raw materials, regional sourcing of training and education. We're seeing a much more high interest in enterprises, corporations, manufacturers wanting to very closely partner with local trade colleges and universities, more so than we've ever seen. And they realize how critical those interlinks are. I think it's very important for the health of the national economy to see that happening, because COVID-19, the government and the industrial reaction to that globally really showed how fragile the supply chain is for raw materials and for finished products.
Yeah, and it wasn't that those gaps or those risks didn't already exist.
They did exist.
COVID-19 did.
They were exposed.
It exposed them. Yeah,
That's right.
Exactly.
That's exactly what happened. And so I think that you're going to see more regionalization of manufacturing. I think it also puts San Angelo to kind of oscillate back to that in a really good position, just because of our central location in North America. So we're south of the central location of the actual United States. But if you look at North America, which includes Mexico, which is one of our largest trading partner behind Canada, barely behind Canada, San Angelo is it's a very sweet spot for manufacturing and for distribution, because you can obviously get north, south, east, west. You can get to the coasts almost the same time.
Right. You can get to your ports within 6-7 hour drive before your tractor trailer's got to shut down and
right.
go on crew rest.
That's right.
I mean, that's hugely important.
I think a lot of people don't understand that too, that the actual over-the-road shipping is run more like an airline, other than it used to be, say, 15 years ago, where it was just, hop in a rig and go for it. You're run like, it's like an airline pilot. You have extremely strict, electronically monitored road time. And that cargo will stop once that driver safety marker point is hit, which sets up a lot of opportunities. And we've actually seen a lot of transload and over-the-road shipping companies that have hubbed themselves here. Ironically, 2 of them from Canada, from Alberta, because they see that central location. We'll talk more about that in a second.
Well, I'll add to that. My experience was when I initially came back to San Angelo and worked for Johnson & Johnson here. Initially, I managed the warehousing and the shipping and receiving department. And I had trucks going back and forth to Mexico out via El Paso every single day. I had trucks multiple times a week coming in from the Port of Houston. And I was shipping out 2 trucks a day, one to our domestic distribution center, which was getting there by the next morning, and then I was also shipping product internationally. And interestingly enough, you'd never guess it, though, that from San Angelo, smack dab in the middle of Texas for the most part, I could get product destined for Japan out of our garage door at DFW Airport and on a jet and landing in Tokyo within 48 hours.
48 hours.
Just at a
Coming
little
from
bitty
San
old
Angelo, Texas.
That's right, yeah. So it's amazing, one, the strategic location and the logistics capabilities that we have, being close to the highways, having the rail capabilities, having our regional airport for cargo capabilities. That strategic location is extremely important. Let's move into kind of more about the site selection process and what really matters to a site selector and beyond just the incentives. And I'll give you, I think, 5 key factors in rank order that I think is what really matters to site selectors, stemming off of kind of what we just talked about. And I think the primary drivers for site selectors today have shifted away from, again, that low cost toward more reliability and talent.
Right.
And I think the first one, like we said earlier, was workforce availability and skills is the primary number one factor they're going to look at. If that's a go, no-go kind of decision point for them. And it's quantity and quality, especially in the manufacturing area, it's that mid-level skilled labor is so critical. Second, I think the next thing that they're going to be looking at is your infrastructure and utilities, right? I think a big one here is not just is the site fully served, but is it redundant? And that includes power capacity. I mean, this is huge, and capacity is key because it's not just if it exists, but it's can it handle the load of a new facility or the expansion of that particular facility. And I think by the third factor, now you're starting to talk in what we're talking about, regionalizing the supply chain, risk mitigation. They're really starting, especially at post-COVID, companies are starting to prioritize locations that offer stable logistics, things that are not going to be disrupted by environmental situations or political uncertainty or what have you. Mm-hmm. And I think not only San Angelo, but the state of Texas is very well positioned to answer and fill in some of those concerns from a supply chain mitigation standpoint. And interestingly enough, as we get closer down to the bottom of this list, the fourth one is really now you're just talking about site and building readiness.
Right.
And I know you've got a good story, and I want you to tell this story, is that really what we're talking about here is, let's just say, company's going to ask, can I start construction in 90 days?
Right.
In 180 days?
Yeah.
And that was a huge factor last year for us when you were running point on getting Amazon set up, their distribution center set up here and running. So tell about that, how that worked.
That's a fantastic example. It's one we don't talk about much. We probably should, and I'm glad we're doing it now. The negotiations with Amazon, you'll recall that when we started talking to them in 23, it was very secretive company, double NDAs, so we couldn't talk to anybody. And when the announcement came, we even had staff members who said, when did this happen?
There's a lot of I can either confirm or deny
your
answer to your question.
That's right. So the negotiations took a long time. I mean, it took 6 months, which to them is pretty compressed, but it was the lead up. And then when they finally made the decision that they were going to go forward. So it was a new program called Project Wagon Wheel. And this was an experiment to build what are now known as RSRs, rural super rurals, which were miniaturized versions of their fulfillment centers. So their experiment was, let's go into the tertiary markets, more rural communities. We're going to do 4 in 2024. They were going to open 4 new ones. And they'd rented a couple of buildings in the year previous to see if it would work. One was in Nevada, one was in Florida, one was in Arkansas, just to see, and it worked great. And they liked it, so they said, okay, go for it, fund it, make it happen. But the negotiations took a while. And then when they decided, okay, we're going to go live, we had 11 months, we as a community and their construction company Catamount out of San Antonio had 11 months to build something that probably really needed 14 months. And I recall we had the team meeting where we openly revealed who the company is and what their objectives are. A 12-acre facility, 12-acre lot with a 35,000 square foot facility, large trucking and shipping apron, brand new building. It was the first brand new rural, super rural built in the United States, or anywhere for that matter. And calling the team together. I remember we had a meeting with city planning, and we said, okay, here's the situation. This company is going to build this facility, and they have 11 months to do it, and it has to be live. I can't remember what the exact date was, but
Well, it started in November.
I think it was November 23rd.
And they shifted it to right before Christmas.
That's right. And they pulled it off. They did it. But if it was so important for us to have the buy-in and just the interest from the city development team. And they really took ownership of it. And they of course couldn't tell their friends and neighbors whom they were working with, although the rumor was starting to kind of get out. But they wouldn't talk. But they said, we've got this project we're building for a large shipping company, and it's going to be built for a 24 delivery. I remember you and I got that one phone call where there was a couple of week gap, and the developers from Seattle called and they said, we've got a problem. And you never like hearing that. And they said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, we've lost almost 3 weeks. I said, well, was that something that did we do that? And they said, no. The delivery date is so compressed that somebody in Seattle naturally enough filed it for a 25 delivery because they just presumed it would be a 25 delivery.
We don't move this fast.
No one can move this fast. Not even Amazon thinks that they can move that fast. And they had to refile it, resubmit it to the development department and through legal saying, no, this is for a 24 delivery. And I remember that was a rather spirited phone call where we had to almost become counselors. But you recall, Mike, that was our time to really shine, exactly about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because once that call came in and they said, we've had a problem, it got misfiled at corporate as a 25 delivery. It cannot be a 25. It will not be a 25 delivery. It must be a late 24 delivery. And that was our time to say, okay, we've met with the city development department. We have them on the phone with us right now. We will make your 24 delivery happen. Nothing will stand in the way. And it was to the point where they even said, what could stand in our way? And we had all the members of the different departments, the development review committee saying, we're not getting in the way. Yep. We're making this thing happen. Don't worry about it. Keep moving. And the only thing we had to do, and this was the strangest negotiation component, they said, tell us about the weather. So I remember us looking up the weather apps as to when are the kind of the rainy points, because you remember that obviously that could delay. And they said, well, we've got a little bit coming in March, and we might have some in November. Yep. But they're not going to be. We don't. And it's almost like we're looking in an almanac, a weather almanac, and that's the granularity to which they said we have to make sure we plan for any potential road bumps or eventualities. Yeah. And of course we knew. No one else did, but we knew how much money they'd invested so far in the process. Yeah. They were very far down the road. They were. But they also had to make sure that they could assure Seattle leadership confidently that they could deliver. Because you remember, if they couldn't deliver in late 24, they're going to scrap the deal completely.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, right? Is like all the numbers made sense. The market was right. They had a willing participant to sell them land and help them through the process. But what it came down to was, in the end, speed to market.
That's right.
And that's part of the value proposition that we have to provide is we can help facilitate speed to market, because that would have killed the whole thing.
Because we weren't in control of that.
No.
I mean, we had to call Aaron Vinoy and his whole team at city planning and say, guys, we've assured Amazon. We couldn't say who it was, although I think they kind of figured it out, that we could collectively make this delivery. Is that accurate? And they said, yeah, it's accurate. Yeah, we can do it. And I love that kind of confidence. I mean, that was an awesome transaction. And now what was great is that earlier this year we got the call from Henry out
Yeah,
of the facility.
that's right.
He said, "Hey, we were just asking him, how are things going? How's your hiring? Is it, kind of looking for an anecdotal? Is what we all agreed the community could do to support WTX9, which is the code for the actual facility, is it really happening?" He said, "Oh yeah, it's great. It's going great. Hey, by the way, we're also we got a communique and a visit from Seattle. We're the top performing rural super rural in the country." And it was like, "Oh, thanks for that. By the way." That was awesome. I'm like, "Well, Henry, this is great. What do we do with it?" He goes, "Nothing." I was like, "Okay." I said, "What did they do?" He said, "They just told us thanks. Gave us a little plaque on the wall, and we got back to work."
We still get to go into work tomorrow.
Yeah,
that's what we get out of it. Yeah,
no, and that's a really cool facility. It's a very international facility. It's
a huge success story for us.
Huge amount of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I mean, you go in there, and the facility is brightly lit with special light bulbs that are supposed to do something for your eye with the spectrum of the light and music playing, and it's kind of neat how all the different teams have a little bit of competition going with each other because they all wear different uniforms, and they're like little gangs. They kind of always trying to one up the other on how much more efficient they are, and you hear them. You go to the facility and they're kind of clustered up together, looking at each other, waiting for the next truck to come in and who's going to do the fastest delivery and who's going to be the most efficient. And I thought it's an awesome culture.
Yeah.
It's kind of like visiting Google. It's a culture.
Sure.
Yeah, it was kind of neat to see. So we're really pleased with that transaction.
Definitely. All right. Last item on the ranking of factors for site selectors. Really now it comes down to that logistics and transportation, right? So they're looking at proximity to highways, rail, reliable airport cargo support.
Which Amazon was all over. I mean,
of course they
come
were.
on, look at what they do for a living, right?
Yeah.
Second largest company in the world.
And I'm even working
based on logistics and supply chain and supply movement.
Yeah, but not even big companies like that, right? I mean, that's a big example. I'm working with one right now, smaller firm, and it's interesting how this worked out. Was they need a distribution center here, but not they need it. Their customers basically have demanded that this entity set up a distribution center here because of, one, our logistics capabilities, but it's closer to all of their where they've got to deliver. So I think that regionalization of the supply chain, localizing it, getting it closer not only to your suppliers but also to your customer base, serves San Angelo very well. And I think that logistics and transportation capability and our relative proximity to the Permian is a huge factor that plays in our favor, because a lot of our oil field service companies, one, that's why they're here, because they're close enough to get their products out to the oil field. But they understand that their employee base would rather live here in San Angelo, so they set up shop here.
Right.
And they drive a couple hours, and they can still deliver it same day as needed. Quick turnaround, quick delivery, everything that everybody's focusing on right now that site selectors are looking for, we've got it. It's just a matter of maximizing it.
I think that San Angelo, and you and I see this, and that's what gives us such a unique perspective. I'm really glad for this podcast, because we can share what we're seeing without naming company names and obviously non-disclosed information. But where is San Angelo going, and what do we think it's going to look like in, it's called 15 years? 15 years. I think we're trending a direction of what we see happening north of Austin, Georgetown, Jarrell, Taylor, Samsung facility, and all the smaller outlying communities. I think we're trending that direction. And we can see that the ground is being laid. The purchases are being made of the tracts of land, the interest from developers, the interest from corporations. But I don't think it's going to be out of control. And I think that's what's important about what we do and our partners at the county, our partners at city elected leadership, having those regular dialogues of data and direction and how we manage that process. And I think that some of the cities that I just mentioned, which are just, I was there a couple of weeks ago, absolutely explosive growth, quality growth, but explosive, very rapid, almost too fast in some areas.
Sure.
It's shocking, really. But I don't think we're going to have that because we're not in that close proximity to a major metropolitan area, but we're close enough to where
we're a contender.
Companies culturally proved to themselves during the whole COVID reaction that they can put corporate leadership and manufacturing anywhere they want. It doesn't have to be necessarily at the Port of Houston, which 20 years ago, you had to be within 5 miles of the port. Right. And in some cases, that may still exist. But the companies can go anywhere they want. And we keep seeing this over and over again. So I think that the quality of life, the quality of delivered homes and neighborhoods is going to really, I think it's going to really start to blossom here in the next 24 to 36 months. We're going to start to really see that.
Agreed.
But I don't think it's going to be harmful to the culture of the community.
No, I don't think so.
I think it's going to enhance it.
Because I still believe
these home builders and companies don't want to harm the culture.
Right.
You know, they want to keep it.
I think that's
we get asked that all the time. How do we make sure we don't harm the culture of the community and run ourselves out of town?
Well, I think
how do we blend with you?
And the way we do that, right, is what we're seeing. And that's kind of where we come into play is we nurture and kind of guide that slow, steady, planned growth, right? Not this massive spike where you have these ups and downs, but just a nice, steady, planned growth. And it's interesting. We're talking about growth and what we expect to see. And all of that we're seeing is really happening without having to get overly involved in discussions of incentives or assistance, and that's organic. That's not because we're stiff-arming our customers or clients. It's just, it's not really the deciding factor anymore. Incentives aren't. They're, if anything, right, at most, it might be a tiebreaker if your location's in competition with another location. But again, it's not the deciding factor. At most, those incentives or those assistance items may offset the risk or the cost of land acquisition or infrastructure development or maybe some, hiring of employees and their associated training. But it's really only used at the end to maximize maybe the company's return on their investment overall.
Well, that's
right?
why you and I use the term. And we've had site selectors start parroting our term back to us. And we've had a couple of them say, I like that phrase. And then we call it constructive assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we see that. And how many companies have we had who we've said, hey, your company, per your North American Industrial Classification Code and the laws of the state of Texas for economic development, which are very aggressive, your company qualifies. And we've had so many companies just say, don't worry about it. It's okay. And the times we've asked the city council and the county for assistance, it's what's the phrase we use a lot? It's more symbolic than material.
Yeah.
And how many? And we have one example of a company where we said, hey, guess what? You've qualified, and they've said, give it to someone else. And we'll tell them, well, we don't have anyone else that needs the help, and by law we can't give it to a startup. You recall that?
Yeah.
You remember that? We use it. You have to be a going concern, profitable for 3 years in a row. And startups are the ones that sometimes come to us saying, "Boy, we could sure use the help." And we're like, "Well, we're kind of tied by state law. We can't, not with those types of tools." But we've had companies tell us, "Don't worry about it. It's making sure we're welcome in the community and that the community is going to be there for us in 10 years." That's what counts.
Yeah. No company is ever going to choose a location that has poor workforce, unstable utilities,
No way.
not of a welcoming community, just
And
because their
you'll
incentive
never hear 'em
package was
say,
larger.
We'll figure that out in 3
No.
years.
The incentive
Never.
package has no bearing on that. If none of the other stuff exists, that
That's right.
doesn't
You
it doesn't enter the
You cannot
equation.
buy success. You cannot buy efficiency.
Right, and to that point, I think, anybody that thinks your incentives packages are going to fix a broken process.
Well, what was that
It ain't gonna
CCIM
work.
report you pulled up? What was around the time we were working on the Amazon negotiation? Mm-hmm. Where really, I think the commission, the part of the report was commissioned by Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. That
Yeah,
was a CCIM
I
report
think it was
on
a-
this
It was analyzing
world of incentives.
and analyzing their shift in site selection philosophy when they were looking at where they were going to put their second headquarters.
Okay, that's what it was. It was
and
HQ too.
and it was less about overall cost. Yes, that was a factor, but it wasn't that first. It really came down to, is that community the right fit for our company culture? And that was a primary deciding factor before they looked at anything else.
Which was kind of an interesting treatise on site selection philosophically. I found that to be a fascinating report where they were kind of going. They hired a large entity, CCIM, to do this report. And they said, I'm thinking that maybe just a good cultural fit where our employees feel good about their community and our presence in their community, that's what really matters. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, no kidding. Really? You need a report to tell you that? But it obviously, it spoke to us. And I think that made a big difference in a lot of the ways site selectors and the Site Selector Guild thinks of communities. Rounding it out to your point,
yeah,
is it a good cultural fit? That's the first thing.
yeah.
Which is good, because I think a lot of people in the public, they hear about incentives and they read in other communities where these massive tax incentives packages are being deployed, and you hear the term government subsidies or corporate largesse. And boy, we just don't find that here.
So
and
what do
we've
you-
got those tools to offer
Yeah,
if we need it.
sure.
Kind of that break glass in case of emergency, but we just don't break the glass.
Don't have to. So what do you think surprises site selectors about San Angelo? What would you say? For as long as you've been doing this, what do you think surprises them the most?
I think the diversity of the community. You have so many different types of manufacturers. You have so many different captains and leaders of industrial sectors right here. You've got, you have a company here, Principal Sloan, that manufactures and markets 70% of the internals globally for LED signage
Yeah.
and display. 70% global market share, right out of San Angelo. They have 3 locations, three little large campus. They make like a campus, but you have 3 facilities, all working in concert together. You've got aircraft component manufacturers. You've got automotive replacement part manufacturers, the only one in North America that does what it does. You've got Johnson & Johnson. You've got an Air Force base that communicates heavily, technically and materially with Angelo State University. You've got a university that is becoming an expert, an industry leader in communicating with manufacturing and what manufacturers want to talk about. And when these site selectors come to San Angelo, they're amazed. And it kind of makes you, they just wonder, we heard this a couple of weeks ago. Where have you guys been? Where have you been our whole lives? And as much as we try to promote the community to site selectors and to corporations and to those members of companies that are told to scout new communities, they're always amazed by it. They're amazed by the school system, the diversity of it. They're amazed by the fact that really the community is a very attractive, aesthetically pleasing community. We've got 3 rivers that run through it.
Got a lake.
You've got a lake.
You've got water out here in West Texas.
That's another thing we've touched on. We don't have to go into it now, but being in an arid part of the state and the country, San Angelo has 4 distinctive water sources. Mm-hmm. And you think, well, that's because you have to. Well, yeah, to a degree, but the community for decades has made sure that it had backup systems. And now the next one that's on the way is the Concho River Water Reclamation Plan, which was really pushed into the study by Mayor Brenda Gunner. You've got 7 million gallons of clean, drinkable, treated water going back into the Concho River once it's processed, and we can pick it up 7 miles downstream and reuse it if we need to, if we want to. And I say that because you look at my former hometown, Austin, has one water source, Lake Travis. Pretty much that's it. And that's one body of water that entire region depends on. And that can be very risky when you go into a heavy drought season. And nobody notices it. You don't really notice it because, you turn it on, it's always there. Whereas in San Angelo, we've had that comment made back to us by site selectors that the citizenry and the leadership don't even crow about it, but they're very eco-conscious. Mm-hmm. They're very, very ecologically conscientious. And we'll tell them the story about how in I think it was in 2012, when we were getting close to a pretty high level drought restriction. The citizenry just they overperformed.
Yeah.
They stopped using so much water that the city water department said, "Man, we
got a revenue problem.
We got a revenue issue here because people are doing beyond what we expected they would do," and the citizenry was very proud of that. But that's what happens when you get people who understand that we're in an arid community that doesn't have a lack of water. It just doesn't have an absolute abundance. But you look at cities like there was a report recently on Corpus Christi. Mm-hmm. Corpus Christi has a huge water issue, and I pray that they find solutions. But you think it's a coastal community.
How is that possible?
Tropical area. We've all been in Corpus. It rains every day at noon, big drops, and yet for 3 years they've been in a pretty bad drought. So it can happen anywhere. But I like the fact that the community is very conscientious about its natural resources as well, which helps inform us what direction do we want to take economic development.
Yeah, and that's key, I think. So just to kind of finalize today, put a bow on it, finish up by saying that I think site selectors really aren't just looking for who can throw the most money at the project, who's got the biggest bid, but what they're looking for is, they're looking for capacity, they're looking for collaboration, and they're looking to build a relationship with the community that's based off of trust, so they can make those good database decisions, right? So again, next week, I think we're going to get a little more tactical. We're going to talk a little bit about some specific deal structures that we've gone through and how we've won those projects or made those projects successful without giving everything away to get it done.
Sure.
And then...
which is a common theme.
It is. We got lots of stories to tell about that. So...
looking forward to it.
Yeah, hey, if this episode sparked your interest, make sure you like and follow and subscribe and share this podcast with somebody who you think might benefit from it. And we will see you guys next week.